I have recently decided to go back to air cooling. Here are my reasons for getting the Hyper 212 Black Edition air cooler. Low cost. The Hyper 212 Black Edition comes in at around $30, which is a good price for a CPU cooler in my opinion. Using a lower cost CPU cooler reduces the overall cost of the build. And many CPUs these days are easily handled with the Hyper 212 Black Edition CPU cooler. I don't really see the point of using a high-end cooler these days unless you're going for a maximum overclock or are using a CPU with high wattage requirements. I was using a Core i5-13600K, which was mildly overclocked, so my cooling needs were reduced. But I recently upgraded to the Core Ultra 7 265K, so I wanted to see how this CPU cooler could handle the new Intel CPU. Performance. This CPU cooler does a great job at cooling the Core i5-13600K. Even with an overclock, this air cooler keeps my CPU far away from the 100 Celsius temperature limit, even when loading all the cores, which brings my CPU up to around 150 watts in a full multi-thread test like Cinebench 2024. I recently upgraded to the Core Ultra 7 265K, and am getting good results even with a budget air cooler like this. At stock, you may see some thermal throttling in heavy multi-core loads, where the Core Ultra 7 265K can get up to around 200 watts, depending on your ambient temperature. But after I lowered the voltage, this CPU cooler was enough to cool even the Core Ultra 7 265K without throttling. My Core Ultra 7 265K is running the P cores at stock clocks, but I have overclocked the E cores to 4.7 GHz, so even after lowering the voltage, I am getting more performance than the CPU does at stock. As an example, here is me running Cinebench 2024 with this Hyper 212 Black Edition cooler on my overclocked Core Ultra 7 265K. The P cores are stock, but the E cores and ring are overclocked by 200 MHz. And I am using DDR5 8200C38 with tuned timings. Under these settings, my CPU scored 2175 points in the multi-core test and 140 points in the single-core test, which is a higher result than you will find in some reviews thanks to my slight overclock of the CPU and RAM tuning. As for the temperatures, one of my 20 cores hit the 100C limit in the 10-minute Cinebench 2024 multi-thread thermal throttling test. But there was no thermal throttling thanks to my undervolt. For most people running a Core Ultra 7 265K, I'd recommend a bigger cooler, but this cooler is more than enough for a 13600K. And after undervolting the Core Ultra 265K, this cooler just barely is enough for my needs even with an overclock. But if I was running stock voltages, there would be thermal throttling in this heavy multi-threaded scenario. Aesthetics. I quite like the look of the new Hyper 212 Black Edition CPU cooler. It goes nicely with my machine. It is an understated design and is much more compact than some of the higher-end air coolers available today. It is an improvement over the previous design in my opinion. There appears to be at least two different versions of the Hyper 212 Black Edition. The first edition of this air cooler I bought was back in 2019, and it has a different design from the current model. The new design appears more minimal, and as someone who cares about aesthetics for their machine, I quite like the look of the new design. The new model also comes with different packaging, and the Intel mount is compatible with LGA 1700 and LGA 1851. So that it can be used on Alder Lake, Raptor Lake, and Arrow Lake. It is also compatible with AM4 and AM5 CPUs. The new model also comes with a good bit of CryoFuse thermal compound. I can't remember the thermal paste that came with the 2019 edition, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't in a tube this size. By comparison, here is the tube that came with my 280mm all-in-one liquid cooler, which I am upgrading from. I'm very happy that it seems to come with a good bit of thermal compound, as I will upgrade my CPU again sometime in the future. GPU compatibility. When I had a 280mm radiator at the front of my case, It limited the maximum GPU length that could go inside. With the 280mm radiator removed, my case now has enough room for even an RTX 5090 Founders Edition. I am also happy to see that many NVIDIA board partners are now offering options of their GPUs in more small form factor sizes. Last generation, many of the cards were simply too big. But this time, I have a lot more options when it comes to GPUs thanks to the removal of my prior 280mm radiator and adding an air cooler like this. Less moving parts. With an air cooler, like the Hyper 212 Black Edition, there are less moving parts to worry about. With an AIO, you have the pump and multiple fans as potential points of failure. With this cooler, it's just the heatsink and a single fan. In the end, this was a great upgrade in my opinion, as the Hyper 212 Black Edition did a great job at cooling the Core i5-13600K, and also does a great job at cooling my Core Ultra 7 265K, which I have undervolted. After undervolting, I am able to run the Core Ultra 7 265K with this cooler with no thermal throttling and a full multi-core load like Cinebench 2024, while getting even higher scores than many reviews out there since I overclocked the E-core's ring ratio and have tuned the RAM. I made this upgrade knowing full well that this CPU cooler does not perform like my prior 280mm all-in-one liquid cooler. That liquid cooler provided a better cooling solution and served me well for several years, but since I am now using a more mild overclock, this CPU cooler is more than up to the task of keeping my CPU well within safe temperature limits. As someone who likes to tune their components for the highest efficiency, I quite like having a CPU cooler like this. Additionally, I am now able to put larger GPUs inside my case. Thanks for watching.